Yeah, back at it again, man.
Yeah, another year.
This one we decided to do. We're just doing Decision 2024.
Yep. Straight politics.
All politics from here on out. No music.
Although the viewership that we have is to even more of a minimum now.
Yeah. It'll be cut in half, so we want to thank the one person that...
Right, thanks, Arnie.
Thanks for sticking.
Right.
No, we...
This is a great year, man. This is a big...
we're running through our years. Again, we're not doing it in order, which I think is fine. I think that would get a little tedious. I don't know. I like kind of jumping around.
Yeah.
But we're doing 1993.
It's getting a little easier to compile stuff now that this third one we've done. It's getting a little easier. The first time when we first did this, I was like, what are we gonna? Now I'm kind of getting
what are you gonna do? You're gonna have like lists down. You're gonna, whatever. So, and I probably should have done this before, but bring the computer up and just kind of use this. I know you got your playlist there.
I'm happy with just talking about Wolverine Blues for the next hour and a half. That's fine with me.
I know a lot of people that won't be happy, but I'm with you.
May as well get that out of the way now that there's gonna be a lot of Wolverine Blues.
Yeah. Now I think that this is. I've always wanted to do an episode that was kind of like bands with, and I think I probably mentioned this before, because with the '95 episode that we did.
Yeah.
Like transition albums, like albums where bands kind of really changed, did something different. But I think that for the most part, it worked.
Sure.
And so I think there were a lot of albums for me, especially being in, my God, '93. I was in middle school, so I'm thinking.
Yeah, I was 7, so you would have been, or 8. I was 8. 7 and 8, so you would have probably been like,
I think it's
13,
14, 13, 14. It would have been 8th grade for me.
It's a pivotal year. That's my 99, yeah. A better time for you to be 13 than me.
Yeah.
I can't even think of you really lucked out. No, it is like I have a lot of bands. I have a lot of albums that are like genre defining, artist defining records by bands.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Throne, Under a Funeral Moon, for example, and then you have Heartwork, Carcass. So it's like there are definitely like different. One is definitely a more. I think Heartwork's beloved now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a transitional record, whereas I think Under a Funeral Moon is like hardcore black metal fans like still hold that as like being a genre defining second wave black metal record.
Yeah, it never gets as much as Transylvanian Hunger. Or oh my God,
Blazing
Northern Sky. For some reason, I kept
the first one I ever bought though. I bought this one first,
and it never gets as much love I think as those. But I actually like Under a Funeral Moon better than those two albums. Yeah. Not that I dislike those, but in terms of like their black, to me, like the 3 black metal albums that define that band, not mentioning, Soulside Journey, because that's obviously not a black metal album.
Death metal record.
But to me, it was Under a Funeral Moon.
I think '93 is one of those years though where it's like, especially as I was going through the list with the black metal stuff, like you have Pure Holocaust, you have Burzum, Engensingvar, whatever that record is. It's a huge black metal record.
Mm-hmm.
You have Dark Medieval Times by Satyricon. It's such a great. Mysticum had their album Psy. You had so many good bands, Necromancia and Pale Nazarene.
You get a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, it's like there's so many great black metal albums in '93. Because I think in '93 that's when the black metal genre was really like, in that second wave black metal's in its nucleus of kind of really forming. So as I know, like you're gonna mention a lot of hard rock bands, and then we're gonna get into some death metal records. And you're right. I think like some of these bands are kind of drifting away, like we talked about '95, but. We mentioned black metal in '95. We mentioned black metal in '99, but I think '93 is like these records, by Dark Throne, by by Burzum, Satyricon. They're so even Abigail in Blasphemy Night comes out in '93. Like there's so many great genre-defining records in black metal that I think you just can't. I'm trying to get it out of the way early because it's like you gotta just acknowledge.
Yeah, for me, getting to like '95. 94, 95, 96. There was a lot of amazing black metal albums that came out in those years. And when I'm going back and I'm looking at all this stuff, you know, Rotting Christ with Thy Mighty Contract.
Yeah, Contract. Which I've been jamming so much since we started to do this year. I love that album so much.
No, dude, that's Rotting Christ is amazing, and that album's great. But
it's hard to define their sound.
It's well, Greek black metal is my favorite.
Yeah,
it became my favorite over the years. I used to me, it was always like Swedish black metal, Norwegian, Finnish. But then, you know, the more I started listening to a lot of the Greek black metal, like Necromantia, Rotting Christ.
Yeah.
God, I'm thinking of Barathron, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff like that. Instantly, like it just became.
It has those groovy riffs.
They're super groovy.
Catchy.
Not a lot of blast beats.
Right. More Celtic Frost. I think more Celtic Frost really than really. I think like Marduk, they have Those of the Unlight here, and that's like it's way different than something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which I love. Those of the Unlight. It's some of my favorite black metal records, you know, the '90s. And I think one of the last pure black metal albums of this early sound that Marduk did. I think eventually they got a little bit more extreme metal with the blasting and.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Panzer Division, which is kind of almost it's absurd. Which I mean, but this is still their kind of early black metal stuff. But yeah, Rotting Christ has that really interesting. Like I was talking to Mike from Hammer, and he was like, "How would you really describe their sound?" I was like, "I really can't."
You can't. To me, it's. I think that whatever their sound is became the Greek black metal sound.
Yeah.
And I think it's mainly because of them. I mean, maybe people would disagree. They'd probably come up with some other bands, but I think Rotting Christ is like the preeminent band of that whole scene from for Greek black metal. But their sound is like so different, and the reason why I think they're the originators of it is because it's like so many other bands came out after that have that sound. Even bands now that are like newer bands like Ithaca.
They really have it. Yeah,
it's like it's really kind of back to that.
I think it's that riff style. I think they kind of coined that riff style and that sound. That you're right. You kind of can't have a riff like that. It's like those breaks in the song that have those kind of groovier Frost riffs with those hooks.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you do that, it kind of just you immediately think Rotting Christ.
Yeah,
because nobody else really was doing it. You're right. It's way different than even something like. Even a lot of the Peaceville bands are doing it. I noticed, I know we're getting into a lot of... This could easily be a Peaceville episode, too. It was such an amazing year for Peaceville. Like, we talked about Dark Throne. I know you're a big Catatonia guy.
Dude.
And they were on a lot of black metal lists for 93, which I found funny. A lot of the black metal fans kind of geared towards them a lot. Which
Dance of December Souls is... I stop... And I told you this before, I like some of... Discouraged Ones is really where I stop. Tonight's Decision and stuff, it's like, okay, that's kind of cool, but Dance of December Souls is like the shit. I mean, I think it's just...
Yeah.
And I don't know, I really wouldn't consider it... To me, it's just like a Doom Death album. It's not really black metal, but I can kind of see why they would throw that in there. I guess, I don't know. But, another peaceful album, My Dying Bride.
Yeah, stuff that I really love. But to be honest, man, as we were getting ready to do this, I probably jammed Anathema and My Dying Bride and Catatonia more than a lot of the other stuff in '93. I think these albums are so great. Even At the Gates, with Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness was a Peaceville record for this year. It's a huge year for Peaceville. And I found it interesting. I was doing my research on this. I guess this is the first year where Peaceville started to do the major label kind of reaching out, where they were starting to really blow up as a label. And then by '95, they kind of get the deal solidified where all they're going to be distributed through a major distributor. And it's these records that really blew Peaceville. I mean, not Dark Throne, probably, if you asked. But I think these bands were kind of, they were huge. Like Serenades and My Dying Bride, From Those Swans, great, still doomy, so British. Something so uniquely British about the way they sound. There's still some death metal in there, but you can tell they're drifting away from it a little bit. Not maybe so much,
Yeah.
Whereas I can see where, like, we'll talk about Wolverine Blues and Hard Work, great albums, but there is a drift from Left Hand Path to Wolverine.
Yeah.
I just like Wolverine Blues, but it is a departure.
It is,
from
and that's kind of like goes back to what I was saying about a lot of these bands doing something different. That I think a lot of the older metal fans, especially the guys that were really hardcore into a lot of the early albums from these bands,
right.
And then as soon as they started doing something different, they were out. They were like, "Fuck this!"
Oh, yeah.
You know, Wolverine Blues, Chaos AD, Sepultura.
Yeah,
I love
great
Chaos
one.
AD.
I love Chaos AD. I love it to death.
I don't give a shit what people say. Roots, okay, I can understand. I don't know how you feel about Roots. You like Roots?
I don't. Here's the thing, man. I don't. If it's on,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not throwing a fit. But do I go out of my way to listen to it as much? No. But do I? But again, do I understand why people hate it? Sure. Chaos AD to me still has enough thrash. It has enough heaviness for me to really like it. There's a lot of punk.
I was gonna say that's the next thing I was gonna say. There's a lot of punk attitude in it. Lyrically, it's like super political.
But I understand that that's maybe not what a fan of Beneath the Remains would have wanted. I don't mind if there's a lot of punk because I like punk. But if you're a death metal fan or early fan of their early stuff, I can see why you're listening to
There's people that stop at Beneath and they don't even go to Arise, which I don't even understand that.
That's insane.
It's like that's fucking. They need to be reported to a fucking Department of Homeland Security. At that
you are a domestic terrorist if you think that Arise sucks.
I mean, it's ridiculous, but I can understand. I can't understand that not liking Arise, but a lot of these albums I can understand why people didn't warm up to them like they did. Like I can understand why people didn't warm up to Wolverine Blues. To me, it's just as heavy.
This is a major doom death year though, where I think a lot of these bands, Anathema is moving away a little bit. My Dying Bride is starting to add the clean vocals a little bit. To me, My Dying Bride was doing almost a slightly more extreme thing of what Typo was doing. Bloody Kisses '93. That's a great. To me, I was pairing Typo Negative, Bloody Kisses with these doom death records. Same kind of atmosphere, maybe not as aggressive.
Another one,
but Unholy, another doom death band, Ceremonium. Those bands are a little heavier. Disembowelment, Transcendence. I mean, that's
there's one
extreme.
I think I brought up when we were talking about '90s doom, and I brought up Paradise Lost, Icon. That's another one going from Shades of God to Icon. It was different. Now, I think Icon is absolutely just a flawless album.
Yeah, it's great.
Flawless. I think it's vocally, the guitar work is great. I love everything about it. But that's another one that one I think a little less, but I have seen people here and there say, well, it's not death metal anymore. It's like, well, Shades of God was already kind of moving there a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then Icon, another big one that
they all have elements. So see, I see to me, it's all these doom death bands, whether it's My Dying Bride or with Icon, Paradise Lost, even Disembowelment. Disembowelment had a lot more going on than just death metal. They incorporated a lot of it's almost like an accidentally cool band. It almost sounds like a band that just didn't know what the hell they were doing.
That's one band that I'm not. I mean,
Unholy sounds really weird
never
too.
Ever listened to that
really?
album.
To Transcendence and the Periphery. It's
ever.
Insane.
I've seen it, dude, for years. I've seen people talk about it, and they're just like, I'm surprised that you haven't even listened to it with all the doom that you're into and shit. And I just never.
It's weird. Mm-hmm. It's honestly, you know what the best way I can describe it? And Unholy is like this too, where there's a lot going on with those bands, and it's not just straightforward doom death. You know, it's really not. Like, it sounds like a band that's like trying to incorporate a lot of grind. I'm talking about Disembowelment especially, like a lot of atmospheric stuff. They ended up doing Trial of the Bow after Disembowelment. It's total, Aboriginal music and more ethnic stuff. That's and weird. Atmospheric. Yeah, they were still doing that during Disembowelment. There's a lot more. It sounds like a band that's just throwing a lot at the wall and kind of seeing what sticks. It's just, I can see why you haven't listened to it, because to be honest with you, somebody's like, oh, with all the doom you like it. Just because you like a lot of doom does not mean you like Disembowelment. Like, you could like Disembowelment and not like Saint Vitus. Like, that's totally possible.
Oh yeah.
But I think you're right though. There's a lot of I think Typo though. I know you have it.
That's on my.
I mean, that's to me that's another it perfectly fit with this atmosphere because it's such a well put together depressive record. And I think My Dying Bride, Turn Loose the Swans, and Typo Negative are the best of '93 for that doomier style of stuff.
That Bloody Kisses was on, when I did an episode with, my other buddies that Pat, Nick, and Jason, where we did kind of not gateway bands or albums, but songs that really turned us on to a certain genre, and that was for me, that Bloody Kisses, the songs on that, I was hooked. I mean, that's a massive album for me back in the day. I still remember going to Camelot Music in the mall and buying it, and it's an amazing record.
It's awesome sound.
I mean, it's just...
I didn't get into it until my mid-20s.
Really?
I had never even heard Typo Negative. I totally dismissed them throughout most of my... I didn't know what they were like. I thought they were like some industrial band or something. Yeah. I just didn't like... They kind of had that Manson crowd a little bit.
They did,
type people, so I didn't really know
like the
what
goth
scene. Yeah, I didn't really know what they were about.
Because even when I was in high school, the people that were into Typo were of that crowd, of more like Manson and stuff. It really wasn't. It wasn't like metal dudes that I knew that were into Typo Negative, even though my friends and I were into it. But yeah, it really was. It was like the Mansonites that
Yeah, it was different.
They really did, and they had like the patches and shit. And so I kind of thought. I remember, I think, seeing that before I bought the album, but when I saw I think I said Black Number One was the tune that I first saw, either that or Christian Woman. And it just changed everything for me, because vocally it was so different. Peter Steele's vocals were so deep, so low.
It's really unique, almost like Danzig-ish.
Yeah, but in the songwriting was so good. Like, I don't know. Awesome, it's just October Rust, people would probably consider that their peak. I don't think from Bloody on, to Dead Again, I don't think they released one.
I love Dead Again a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to, between the three, it's really like their trilogy. It's almost like their Dark Throne trilogy, really. And I think it's hard to really pick a favorite. I think Bloody Kisses is probably the most important.
Oh, for sure. That's the album that broke them 100%.
But since I mentioned, bands like Ceremonium, I gotta say another UK band that I had in here was Decomposed. Hope Finally Died. That's more of a straight doom death. That's probably the most straightforward doom death.
I just recently got that within the past year because I kind of went down the YouTube. It pisses me off because I saw that album so many times back in the day, and I didn't know what it was.
Me too. I thought it was a really stupid looking cover.
Yeah, and I just overlooked it, and I didn't give a shit. And then it was just recently, like I said, with like the past year or two, that I was online and I heard a track from it, and I thought,
if they probably would. I know Paul always said, logos matter, artwork matters. If they would have had the old logo maybe and different artwork, I probably would have picked it up.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid and saw it, I was like, buying this bullshit. Whatever it is, a picture of a cabinet. It's like somebody was like, it's like tarts on a cabinet. I'm not watching this British nonsense. Like, it's great though. I love it now, but
there's a lot of stuff back then that I wasn't in terms of like Wolverine Blues and Carcass Heartwork were probably two of the albums that I got into mainly because of their involvement with Columbia.
Yeah, it's big time. Yeah, I see that.
Those are the two.
100%.
And I would say Morbid Angel, which is also another
Covenant
God,
on there. Yeah.
God of Emptiness is what I chose for another on the other podcast.
I told Don Wolf at the last show that we were all at the Colonel GA show on Friday. I told him that I thought that Inside the Torn Apart was better than Covenant, and I think I almost gave him a stroke. So it's like, we have Covenant on there. Covenant's a '93 release. I know Arnie loves Covenant.
We were talking about
Covenant's a little bit more different. I think Covenant's different than, it's as big as Heartwork, but I think it's more straightforward, more of an Angel than
it is. Heartwork to me is almost just like a melodic death metal album.
Do you like Heartwork?
Okay, here's the thing. That was one of the albums I got into. I like the guitar work is fucking nuts.
It's cool sounding.
Okay, but I never really. Bill Steer is just amazing. I never really got into Carcass, like the Heartwork.
Like any of it, like the gore.
At some point, at some point, I was kind of like, I'm not really into this. Within the past couple of years, I threw it on again. I love it. I do.
Necroticism you didn't really like either?
I like that. They're not one of my favorite death metal. I wouldn't even put them in my top 50.
A lot of people actually feel that way and wouldn't. Yeah.
And, Necroticism, I would put, that's a great album. I'm not really big into, symphonies.
I love symphonies.
It's okay to me, but I just think there's better albums out there for that. Heartwork, to me, just cleaned everything up. That's another album that you can consider kind of like a transition from Necroticism to Heartwork, to being a little different. I don't know of too many people that don't like that.
I paired it really well. As I was listening to Carcass Heartwork, I was listening to it a lot these past couple weeks to gear up for this. And I was like, I found myself enjoying it quite a bit, more than I usually do. And after I was listening to it, I put on, Nocturnal. I put on Nocturnal Silence. And then I put on, other stuff that was more melodic as well. So it was hard to really. It's hard to really say whether I dislike it. I think it pairs well with stuff like Dissection, Somberlane, that came out in '93 too, more melodic. But I think, personally, like, Necrophobic, I think is better for the melodic death metal thing.
I mean, the Nocturnal Silence is way better. Too.
Yeah, if you like that kind of stuff. If people say, Heartwork's a melodic death metal record, it's like, it's more like that. But to me, it doesn't have the same vibe as Dissection.
It has a lot of classic metal feel to it. To me, it's real. It's different. It was like when I heard it, it's still heavy as hell. It's fucking Carcass.
Too. Yeah,
lots of groove in it. But you know what? For somebody like me back then that really wasn't too like in the know when it came to death metal, because I was listening to other albums that I'll talk about, that hooked me. It was enough. It was like just accessible enough, like Wolverine Blues, that I was like, holy shit, is this what death metal is? And even though it wasn't, because death metal is obviously, there were albums out like Brutality, Screams of Anguish.
Awesome.
Fucking rolls. And
which when we start to get into more meat and potatoes death metal, that's more different.
But still, it helped me get into that other stuff. You know what I mean? It helped me get into those other death metal albums.
I just think, after I was listening to Heartwork, I put on, Necrophobic, and I put on Dissection, and I was like, this just actually smokes Heartwork.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is way different. It's way darker.
I mean, the guitar playing in Heartwork is great. I think that's the main thing. I mean, it's just phenomenal solos. Covenant, to me, when I saw God of Emptiness, when I saw the video on MTV, I thought that was like the coolest fucking thing. I was already into horror movies. I'm a young kid. Anything that was like dark, evil, you know what I mean? I was like, man, I gotta watch it. I gotta listen to it. And that video came on, and there's some fucking money behind the video too.
So there's some big budget there. They're a little bigger. Some beefs about it.
It's just fucking awesome, man. And that got me into stuff like that. But at the time, my kind of bread and butter back then, it really wasn't like that kind of heavy stuff. It was more Tool, Smashing Pumpkins, Quicksand.
I had Smashing Pumpkins on there too.
Yeah, Quicksand, Life of Agony.
Oh yeah.
A huge album for me was Sound of White Noise, Anthrax, which is my favorite Anthrax album, but it's not my favorite Anthrax era, not the John Bush era, because I think that album is absolutely amazing. It's my favorite Anthrax album. The Belladonna era is my favorite era.
Okay.
But that's my favorite
That's
album.
your favorite Bush album, though? Is your favorite...
I think that's the only Bush album that's worth anything. The Stomp 442 has a lot of nostalgic value to me because, I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, and it just brings back a lot of good memories of buying that album. But I always went back. Sound of White Noise is 100% Anthrax still. It's got a lot of those Anthrax riffs, but it's just I just think it's better. I think it's better written. I don't know. It's like a little more mature. great songs on it, like Black Lodge and shit that
Yeah.
really are kind of outside of the box for Anthrax.
They
And
were
it's,
kind of changing their sound a little bit by then too.
yeah, and that's another transition album that to me was amazing. I mean,
I think Nirvana was doing that with In Utero. Honestly, I think I have that. I would love Nirvana. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. And I think that In Utero is a different sounding Nirvana record.
I told you I think that's probably because I think that went to number 1.
Oh yeah.
And
a lot of metal fans actually like In Utero.
The weirdest number 1, like the most, other than Far Beyond Driven being number 1. That to me is just like straight metal.
Yeah.
In Utero was about the filthiest.
Oh yeah.
Most like it's astonishing to think to look now and look at the music scene, the mainstream music scene, and to look back then and to hear that album.
Yeah.
And to think that was number 1.
And it's funny, a lot of people I think never really listened to a lot of Nirvana and kind of brush them off. Like you've really put that, Steve Albini produced record.
Mm-hmm.
It's that his production is, his name's all over the record. He's all over it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you're right. It's a dirty sounding record. I even think that the Smashing Pumpkins record, Siamese Dream that's it's melodic and it's hooky, it's catchy, but it's still a little bit rooted in that late 80s alternative scene. It's hard to believe that was songs like Quiet or heavy songs, that I think are cool.
I got that tape for Christmas, and that thing today, to me, Gish and Siamese Dream are the only 2 you need. I know a lot
after
of people,
Siamese Dream, I don't like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness.
There's good songs on it, but I just think it's a bloated mess. I think there's way too much filler.
Yes,
there's no reason
I don't like double albums anyway like that. I think it's annoying.
Yeah, there's very few double albums I know that I can get into, other than like live albums. But in terms of stuff like that, I just thought it was kind of over the top. Siamese Dream, to me, I'm going to say what I know Arnie said about Covenant. And I think that they blew their wad on that album for me.
I could see that.
Like with Covenant, and then after he had like Domination. It's like I like Morbid Angel albums after that, but they just don't have that.
Yeah.
Covenant still had that old school feel. Siamese Dream had that old school feel. There's songs on Melancholy that I like, but Siamese Dream still had that like independent underground band feel.
Yeah, it did have that vibe.
And
It's hard to find after this year in '93. It's hard to find bands in the alternative rock scene that have that and capture that, because you're right, it kind of gets diluted.
Yeah.
After this, it's kind of done.
It's just not. And then they turn into like. And Billy Corgan's a fucking awesome guitar player. I don't think people realize
guy,
that.
Yeah.
Jimmy Chamberlain on drums is an absolutely disgusting drummer. I mean, I can't tell you in terms. People talk about like air guitar and shit. When I was 14 years old, I'm listening to this album. That was a huge air guitar album for me. The fucking guitar solos are great. They're super epic, melodic. The slower, the ballad, type songs on it are great. Silver Fuck is one of the coolest.
Oh yeah.
Like there's so much. There's like Guitar Hero influence. There's psychedelic. There's alternative. There's some punk. There's a lot of shoegaze influence.
If you really listen to it, it's funny. A lot of my my metal friends are like hated it in the '90s, but they've gone back and revisited it, and they're like it's kind of a cool record.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like it's also too like we talk a lot about black metal and grind and death metal and stuff and extreme stuff on the podcast, but it's like we talk about hard rock too. And I know like you have a lot of hard rock that you're going to talk about, and it's like the hard rock scene. It's a weird time in '93. There's a lot of like those old guard '80s bands. I think are kind of starting to. The writing's on the wall here that things are changing.
Yes.
That there's this extreme stuff going on. You have bands like Death who put out Individual Thought Patterns, which ends up being a lot bigger. A lot of these bigger.
I thought it was on what, Relativity? I think.
You're starting to get like Ethereal Mirror. You're starting to get all these labels like Peaceville and Earache are working with Columbia. Like you have the underground stuff's blown up. You have these alternative rock bands. Nirvana's the biggest thing in the world still in '93.
That's what.
And so you have Vince Neil putting on a solo record, and it rules.
So when people say, that grunge, which I hate that fucking term.
I hate the term too.
But it's like the Seattle scene, and for people who are into that stuff, you read a book called Everybody Loves Our Town, and it's kind of like it's an oral history of Seattle, of that whole era. But if you read the comments from a lot of people that they interview, a lot of musicians from that scene, they're like, grunge is just a fucking corporate term. It's bullshit. Right. It doesn't describe anything, because
describes a place.
They would put Smashing Pumpkins in that.
Right.
And that's not, you know what I mean?
Smashing Pumpkins sounds nothing like Nirvana.
Exactly. And Nirvana
Alice in Chains sounds absolutely nothing like either one of them.
Exactly. So it was like the hard rock scene, when people say that, grunge killed heavy metal. Well, I don't think it did.
Did those terms were always stupid. Like, did Cinderella sound anything like Motley Crue? Not really.
No.
Like, they were like, they did that with hair metal or whatever they want to call it. Like, Poison doesn't really sound to me like anything like, Great White.
Yeah.
And if you really listen to both bands, it's like, I like some Poison records, I like Great White, but it's like Great White and Cinderella, like blues rock bands.
Yeah.
They don't sound anything like Warrant.
I think it was just, it got to a point where arguably some of these bands put out their best albums, like Winger Pull. A lot of people think that that's one of their best. It's well written. It's a fucking great album.
It's a good Winger record. It is. You're right.
But at that point, I know Winger put out Pull. You had a couple years later, a year or two later, you had Doc had put out Dysfunctional.
Reach the Sky, Rat, right?
What's that? Rat?
Were you to Reach the Sky come up, or was it 89?
88, I
88?
think. Yeah. What was after that? Detonator, I think
Detonator,
it was 90. Warrant put out Dog Eat Dog, but I'm pretty sure that was 92.
Cinderella had a 1994.
Still Climbing, which is a fucking great album. So a lot of these bands were putting out albums around this time from that 80s kind of Sunset Strip, or that, that pop metal scene.
Motley Crue, the self-titled.
That was 94.
Yeah.
But at that point, nobody gave a shit. And I think...
Right. It's true.
There is something that...
It actually was a flop. But I mean...
It was a huge flop. And there's something that can be said for the record companies literally overnight. When you read any of these autobiographies from any of these musicians, they say the same thing. One, like on a Friday, they were fucking still, here comes Monday, they're gone.
Yeah.
The labels are like, you're out of here, we're going with this. And I think that's why Nirvana gets, unfairly slagged for killing that stuff. But they didn't do it.
Nirvana was also appealing to a different... If you look at the back of Green Day Dookie in 1994, and you look at the crowd, it's a bunch of kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bunch of at that time, the hard rock audience in the 80s would have been a little bit older. Mm-hmm. I think that they had a harder time appealing to younger audiences.
And I think that after seeing a lot of the Seattle stuff come out and how they looked, it really wasn't about how they looked on stage. It was more about the music to them. And that's kind of what sucked me into it, even though I still loved the hard rock stuff, and I still do to this day. But I was all over shit like Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana and stuff like that. Because to me, it took it back to almost what my dad kind of raised me on with the stuff he listened to, because he wasn't really into like the glam rock bands of the 70s. He wasn't into like Sweet and Slade and stuff. Right. He was into fucking...
Can't see your dad being a big Sweet fan.
Yeah. Now, he loves that stuff now. But back then, I mean, it was 100% just Deep Purple, Sabbath, Zeppelin. And so when I saw Nirvana or Soundgarden on stage, that's all I saw was, oh, they just look like a bunch of scrubs like fucking Sabbath looked like in 1972. And it didn't bother me, And I think that it was a little too late for a lot of those hard rock bands that came from the 80s, if you want to say from those Sunset Strip style bands. I think that they put out a lot of great albums, the ones I mentioned, and then they did a disservice. Bands like Winger just kind of, they split. There's a lot of bands that gave up, like Cinderella was done. But there were bands like Warrant, Dawkin. They tried to put out albums like L.A. Guns. They were trying to put out albums that just weren't what people wanted.
Yeah.
So not only were they not getting fans anymore, because a lot of those fans, I do think a lot of them kind of went to the Pearl Jam route and stuff because it was something that was fresh and new. But the fans that they kept, they then alienated them by playing new shit, and so it just fucking whittled it down even more.
It's funny you mentioned about the core audience because, like, you know, I think that, like, as the death metal bands are kind of doing the same thing. I think I love, again, Wolverine Blues, Heartwork. I love those records, but they're kind of alienating that core death metal audience. But if you look at '93 with death metal, you have Indecent and Obscene by Dismember, which is still an amazing. Everybody knows Dismember is my favorite death metal band of all time. That's not called Autopsy. They don't have a bad album. Indecent and Obscene is probably my top death metal album of '93.
Okay.
Fair way to pick. I love it. Osculum Obscenum, Hypocrisy. I'm just going down the list. We have Demolic. You have Moral Decay, Grisly Aftermath, getting a little more of the brutal stuff. Suffocation, Breeding the Spawn, Banished. You have so many good stuff. Wombath, Morgue. Too many bands you mentioned. It's like these death metal bands across the open sea is probably the last great Unleashed record. Bands are still kind of doing the death metal thing. So as those bands kind of move away, there's that hardcore audience. It's that younger audience, and I think that's the problem these rock bands had. They weren't capturing younger kids.
They weren't. I think that's why a band like Guns N' Roses continued until they, obviously split back then. But if they continued to put out albums, I think that they would have they still would have sold millions and they still would have sold out venues because they were grimier. And I think that it was easier for bands, for a lot of fans back then that were really into like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. I think it was easier when you listen to an album like the Use Your Illusions 1 and 2, which were '92, but there was nothing happy about those albums, and I think that's the main thing. The early '90s was like this era for heavier music, more
extreme stuff,
extreme stuff,
even like Cannibal Corpse
stuff.
coming out in the '90s. And you have a Broken Hope, Bowels of Repugnance. Like it's about extremity. Bands are getting really extreme with the content.
Just pushing the boundaries on a lot of this stuff. And one album that death metal album that I put on my playlist that I only know of one other person that likes it, and that's Arnie that likes it, and that's Morgoth, Odium.
Oh, I like Odium.
Different. It's a different album, okay? It's different than Cursed and, Eternal Fall and Resurrection.
I'd rather listen to Desultory Into Eternity, but it's like...
that Into Eternity is one of the best. I love the production on that album so much.
So that's a little more melodic,
but Odium, with the weird shit I was getting into...
Yeah.
That was like... That hooked me. That pulled me in. A lot of other weird shit that I was getting into, like pitch shifter.
It's funny, we're going to get into the industrial stuff in a second, but the last thing I want to say about the Carcass stuff is, like, as Carcass is moving, again, as Carcass is doing Heartwork, you have Pathologist, who puts out probably arguably the best better than General Surgery as far as Carcass worship goes with their record, and Dead Infection, Surgical Disembowelment. You have bands redefining the gore grind thing because Carcass is so far removed from gore grind at this point.
That's the weird thing. A lot of these bands, if you think about so it's like Entombed had, Clandestine, then they went to Wolverine Blues, then it went to Ride, Shoot Straight.
Right.
And then with Carcass, you had Necroticism, then it went to Heartwork, and then, so it's like just a hop, skip, and a jump away. A lot of these bands really changed, and I know you love Swan Song. I think musically Swan Song is fine.
But the kids listening to those Reek demos started Dead Infection because they're like, I'm not listening to whatever the hell they're playing now.
Yeah, so a lot of these bands were doing different stuff, and I think Resurrection came out, didn't it?
And so did Morta Skuld in 1993. Another great Peaceville band that goes big year for Peaceville, dude. Morta Skuld, that Morta Skuld record is insanely good.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Was it Dying
Remains? Amazing.
Dude, that Resurrection, the fucking, like...
The little spoken word
intros are so...
Daddy, no! no. It's like, so God, it's
Drink the urine of a dog.
Yeah, I mean, it's
The
cool.
light world.
It's that's almost a little bit.
The album fucking rules, dude. I mean,
cool.
the
It's a good album.
rules. It smokes. But yeah, those fucking intros are just hilarious.
I think but you mentioned Pitch Shifter though, and again, with the industrial stuff. I mean, for '93, I had the Pitch. That's also the last Pitch Shifter records. I love industrial, and we also had two great industrial influence albums from Shane Embry in '93. Had Meat Hook Seed, and you had Blood from the Soul. Put out a record in '93, which I think is awesome. But that's the last Pitch Shifter album that I'll even look at, because everybody knows I like a lot of hot take stuff, but I got nothing for Pitch Shifter after that. They look and sound like AIDS.
There's some bands that literally just fucking changed, and they just, to me, they cease to exist, and that's one band.
It was, dude. I think around this time in '93, I think Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, bands like that were getting a little bit bigger, and you also have Kandiru in 1993. You have Dead World that puts out their record. Release Entertainment's getting really big. Like this, Fetish 69 from Austria has an awesome record in '93. Like this, that sound is really kind of becoming its own thing too. And I think that Godflesh had gotten kind of bigger in the underground at this point, and Nine Inch Nails was bigger, and that industrial thing was really kind of taking shape. And the underground was, I think, part of that too. So you have bands on Relapse kind of sharing, that kind of label. So you have, I think Dead World and Kandiru were really interesting bands. Always thought they were really cool, but love that Pitch Shifter record. It's probably definitely the last one that's heavy, because after that they kind of
it still has that kind of grimy earache feel.
It does.
Still
aggressive vocals.
Yeah, and then everything else is just complete shit. But I think that as much as there were death metal bands that were changing, like Entombed, like Carcass, Sepultura, there were still a lot of death metal bands, again, like Brutality, Screams of Anguish. Scott Reigel is
awesome.
2 albums that year, Covenant and Screams of Anguish, have my 2 favorite death metal vocalists.
Oh, Scott's definitely.
David Vincent and Scott. Now, the only thing I'll say is this. We joke about now when Brutality was putting their t-shirts out.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, dude. Like fucking $30, $40 for a shirt online.
I'm happy I have my old one from Paul, but it's like I also don't want to buy a bootleg and have Scott come to my house and stab me to death. But I'm not dealing with that from him. But it's like I think,
But those albums are great. The Resurrection album, Gore Guts, The Erosion of Sanity, which to me,
awesome record.
I'm done with Gore Guts.
Yeah, after that I'm kind of finished.
I don't get into the newer shit.
I'm done with Unleashed after Across the Open Sea, I think, kind of. I really don't really care that much.
I think the newer stuff, I think with Midwinter Blot, or Blue, however you say it, that album kind of brought them back, and I think they've been on a hell of a tear since.
Diabolical Summoning by Sinister, 93.
Yeah. We got to we're bringing up all these Swedish bands like Dismember. You got to bring up Spectral Sorrows.
As I knew it was. Now, I love Purgatory Afterglow the most. But Spectral Sorrows, I mean, awesome. That's that melodic kind of style.
Spectral is my top.
Dark Day is my favorite song by Edge of Sanity.
Actually, no. I take it back. Unorthodox, for some reason, that one just is my favorite of all time. But
they're all great.
When I say that it's like a 10.1, and then Spectral and Purgatory are like a 10 to me. They're absolutely perfect, especially the Manowar cover on Spectral, Blood of My Enemies, which that's, Dan's vocals are going from that super guttural, deep, and you could still understand what he was fucking saying.
Right.
That's, okay, I'm going to start shitting on newer death metal bands now, because here's my hot take. I think a lot of this shit is like the mumble rap of death metal.
That's a good way to put it.
It's just fucking garbage. All of this, to me, this like profound lore shit that comes out, all of these new death metal bands that people go completely nuts over, and I check them out. Mm-hmm. The logos are great, the cover art looks really cool, but then it just sounds like fucking mashed potatoes coming out. It's completely faceless. Like there's no
It's more like they're trying to capture a vibe than write songs.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, there's no like real song, and I see people go completely nuts over this shit. And to me, it's like when you listen to a lot of this stuff back in the day, with Disincarnate, Dreams of the Carrion Kind, James Murphy fucking rules.
Awesome.
Stillborn, Malevolent Creation, which I still love. I know people
Stillborn.
Don't like that album.
I like that. Stillborn's great to me. I like everything up to I even like In Cold Blood. I go even that deep with Malevolent Creation.
But it's all this stuff comes out, and the thing about it is there's like a vibe to it. There's a feel, like you can pick out songs. I can go on to Dismember, Indecent and Obscene.
And if you're gonna rip something off, even in 1993, if Necrony comes out with Pathological Performances, total Carcass influence, because Carcass is doing it. If you're gonna take inspiration from bands, do your own thing still, and make sure the songs are there. Like you can't just capture the tone and do a bunch of stuff. So I agree with you. It's like if you're gonna take influence from these bands, say, well, we're influenced by Incantation, we're influenced. It's like then okay, then you have to. You're already saying there's a caliber of songwriting you better capture, not just their guitar
That's
tones.
what I'm saying. That's a good point, because that's all it is. It's like these bands vocally, they all sound the same. It's all fucking mumbled bullshit, and I hate it because I'm like, when you look back at all these bands we're talking about, all of these vocalists are unique. Back in these days, and it's not, Scott from Brutality doesn't sound like David Vincent, who doesn't sound like, John Tardy, who doesn't. You go down the list, man, and it's
Joe
like
Matasek from Broken Hope, really getting that ultra guttural, Moral Decay, bringing that ultra guttural style of that, like that new something new into death metal. You have Frank from Suffocation, bringing the Spawn. Like you have tons of great. Even Peter from Hypocrisy. Eventually, they still have Masi on Osculum, but it's like a different than Deicide or something like that. It's like every kind of band had their own personality, their own kind of.
Well, Brent Hoffman.
Yeah, everybody had their own vibe.
And that's the thing. Now there's no vibe. Now it's just like, and I laugh because I'm like, okay, here comes a new death metal album. Let me check it out.
You'll just know what it's gonna sound like.
Yeah, and I know exactly what it's gonna fucking sound like as soon as it comes on, and it's death. But I have no problem admitting this. I didn't get into a lot other than Heartwork, Covenant, and Wolverine Blues. A lot of death metal I didn't get into until several years later, when I started getting into like a lot of heavier stuff. And it was more starting with like In Flames and Dark Tranquillity, who had a great album, that year, Skydancer, but later Dark Tranquillity albums, stuff like that. And I started going back, and it really was Arnie, hanging out with him back then, in the late 90s, that he was like, no, you got to hear this shit. And he would just throw this stuff on.
Yeah, dude, nothing sounds like Demolic. In 93, like, nobody sounds like that. Like, that's, if you think about it, like, it's almost cliche, but it's like, you have all these records in 93, then you have Demolic. Nothing sounded like that at that point. Them and Moral Decay, vocally and musically, like, they really were something new. Like doing, and it's hard to think about that now, but it's like you also have to think that they were taking influence from the bands before them and trying to write higher caliber songs just like them, but have their own twist on it.
Yeah,
and I think that's really something that I think is missing. And I think people are forgetting, like, we had arguably the best, groundbreaking, most intelligent record ever in the 90s and 93. We had Everyone Should Be Killed by Anal Cunt. Which I think needs to be mentioned as just, fantastic. AC going strong in 93. It's an amazing. Look, I listen to Anal Cunt, Everyone Should Be Killed a lot. And it's still really great.
I've never been a fan.
And better than probably everything that's on the radio right now. So
well, that I'd probably say, but
dude, that's even in hardcore. Like, you had bands like Spaz, Rupture comes out with Baser Apes. That's an amazing hardcore punk record. I gotta mention it. Raised Ignorant by Capitalist Casualties. Disclose, Once the War Started. Big year for punk too. And a lot of these bands, like, Baser
What kind
Apes.
of punk were you into though then?
Honestly, when I was younger, would have been the faster stuff. So like Rupture and Capitalist Casualties, coming from like the grind thing, would have been the bands I was really into in my late teens and early 20s.
Okay.
So it's like, Base Rapes by Rupture is like really worshipped by a lot of people as being this really ultra fast, amazing stripped down hardcore punk record in this era that nobody was really sounding like that. And Disclose, again, nobody's really doing the DB thing. So there's these bands really kind of take this forgotten sound and they kind of move it forward. Kind of like the same thing that the death metal bands were doing.
Yeah, my thing with hardcore punk back then, I was just starting to dip my toe in it. So it's like, to me, it's stuff that still is very important to me, but I know if I mention it, a lot of people were like hardcore punk people will probably be like, that's not even, but to me it was like Sick of It All, Biohazard, shit like that I was getting into.
I mean, Ringworm came out with A Promise in '93 for Cleveland. Like, that's a big record for a lot of people. That was an introduction to hardcore and stuff.
To me, Quicksand, which has roots in hardcore punk with Walter Bean and Gorilla Biscuits and Youth of Today.
Right.
That to me, Slip that's another one on my list. That was absolutely like life-changing, being able to go and see them in Detroit with a good friend of mine, Jason Parent, goes by Peanut, lives in New York City now. But we drove to Detroit to see Quicksand, and dude, it was just fucking great. Yeah. Seeing a lot of these old school fans there. And that album to me defines that era for me. Like when I listen to Quicksand, when I listen to Life of Agony, River Runs Red.
We Must Burn by Poison Idea, '93. It's a great album. I mean, as far as punk, so classic.
Yeah, and it's like I really wasn't into a lot of that more underground hardcore punk. Yeah. Back then. It wasn't until later, but
Scandinavian Jawbreaker by Anti-Cymex is just goated. I mean, that's perfect, man.
That's one that within like the past 5 years I started listening to.
I mean, a lot of metal people love Anti-Cymex now because it's them and Poison Idea just had that total metal influence sound that they refused to admit was metal influence, but totally was.
Oh, 100%.
But but I think it's a cool year for that stuff too. Ringworm, especially locally, still going strong, and this was The Promise is a very, very influential record for a lot of people around here. It's awesome. And, nothing really sounded like that again in hardcore. You didn't have hardcore records with, Baphomets on the cover. And, that was very unique, very, very different. But I think that, Quicksand is one of those bands, I think, too, that should have probably been a lot bigger than they were at the time.
Yeah, and I know Manic Compression, the next album, I still love it, but I don't like it as much as Slip. Slip to me is one of those albums where every song is absolutely flawless. It's just perfect. And it had such a huge impact. I can't even remember where I got into this shit from. You know what I mean? Like, it must have been on MTV. I saw something, like I saw a video, whatever. But I know a lot of it, like Life of Agony, was through buying Typo Negative and Biohazard albums and looking at the Things list. And then they thank Life of Agony. Then I wanted to go out and buy a Life of Agony album. And this is another band that, to me, after this, I just think they fucking cease to exist. Because I think they literally blew their wad on this album.
Right.
Drummer is Sal Abuscato, who's also in Typo Negative at that time. And to me, I'm trying to think of having a complete brain lock on the fucking vocalist, Life of Agony.
Oh, yeah.
Keith Caputo.
Keith.
Who's now...
what's her name?
Mina.
Yeah.
Whatever.
After River Runs Red, I don't even know if that band has a song I've ever listened to in my life.
It's... Ugly is the next album. I don't think it's bad, but there's just something super grimy fucking New York about River Runs Red. And after that, it's like they lost this kind of vibe to me. And it's not as like drug soaked.
It's another band and album that's kind of hard to really pinpoint. Like what the sound is of the genre. It's kind of There's some
like
alternative
hardcore.
there, hard rock, hardcore.
Is it
there's
hardcore doom? Like what the fuck
yeah,
is it?
it's a weird,
know?
yeah.
And
that's
so
kind of how Leeway got towards the, the end. It's on the last for '95. We forgot to mention, Leeway's last record, and it's the same kind of thing with them as well. I mean, they had Hornet's Nest on there and a lot of great songs, but a lot of those bands kind of were hard to really pinpoint on, hard to put a finger on. And I think Life of Agony was one of them. I think hardcore kids kind of probably liked it because like, what other audience were they really marketed to, really, than that?
Yeah, and for me, I'm gonna bring up the one album that you're gonna fucking despise, Tool, Undertow.
Oh, God. I'm out of fucking booze.
I don't. That's another huge, just huge album for me. Like back then,
I never got it.
Now look, I'm not one of these Tool fanatics, these fucking dorks that like they can do no wrong and
Right.
whatever, and they're totally content with Tool putting an album out once every decade, and like that to me is just bullshit.
At least it's something special when they do. I will say that.
But to me, Undertow is one of those albums that I can listen to literally back to like just over and over and over. And
Before that was Opiate with Sober on it.
no, that's on Undertow.
Is that on? Okay, Sober is on Undertow.
Yeah, Opiate's just like there's some studio stuff, but then there's like some live stuff.
Okay.
Opiate fucking rolls. I mean, I love Opiate. And Undertow and Enema, excuse me, to me are Undertow and Enema are it in terms of if you really want to go back to what Tool is. I like Lateralis. 10,000 Days is okay. The new one, that Fear Inoculum or whatever the fuck it is. It's again, you're talking about a band. This is 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And they have just several albums out, and that's it.
Yeah.
But Undertow is such a huge album, and it's that they're another band. It's like Life of like what does Tool sound like? What do you tell somebody what Tool sounds
It's really hard to describe to you how much I really think that Everyone Should Be Killed is better than Undertow.
like?
I really don't know how to explain that to you without really but I really mean that with everything in my being, that I think that Anal Cum.
When's the last time you sat through Undertow?
I was about to ask the Anal Cum record. I was like 2 days ago. But no, I honestly I did give it a spin for this, and they're not. It's just not for me. I don't really know what it is about them I don't like. It lacks.
The fan base turns me off.
It's not really that. I think that when I listen to Tool, I think it's hard for me because what I want to hear and what I'm expecting to hear, I'm putting too much of stuff I already like into it. Like after I was jamming Pitch Shifter and Dead World and bands like that, I was like, okay, well I'll try this Tool record. Okay, I'll try to put that on. And there wasn't enough industrial in it for me to want that. And then I was like, okay, well, they were like more like an alternative thing, so I tried to put on the Nirvana record, and there wasn't enough clean with that. Then I tried to put on they didn't pair with anything that I was really. And I'm trying to say I want to like this. I want to go into it. They don't have enough in their music that I can draw from. There's something always missing, and I think that's probably because I ignored it when I was younger, maybe, or didn't like. The only thing maybe I could think that had me kind of appreciating it a little bit is if I may be in more of a technical mood, maybe I would like it a little bit more. But I don't really listen to a lot of stuff like that.
Especially with the later albums, I think you have to listen to the actual full album to get the full experience, especially the newest one. But I think that with Undertow, and I always leave out Opiate just because it's such a short album, but with Undertow and Enema, those are the two that are more accessible and kind of straightforward. I think Lateralis kind of starts going into way more prog territory. I think the fan base for turns me off a lot because these people just worship at the altar of this band, and it's there's a lot of me that thinks that the band itself is super just fucking flat out disrespectful to their fans, because they'll say, hey, we're putting out new album coming out, and they'll get everybody excited, and then they'll just fuck around with them.
Yeah.
But they won't do that just for like maybe a couple of weeks. They'll do it for like fucking 7 years.
I mean, there's also
and then it's like,
yeah, I tried to put it on a little bit, but then I was like, I had Rotrevor, Iniquitous. I had Transcend the Rubicon by Benediction, both 93, which I jammed those a lot more. There's so much great death metal in 93 that I was kind of caught up doing that. Also, Drop Dead had their self-titled 1993 record. I was talking about Punk before. It's another classic one. I would feel really shitty if I didn't mention that. Apocalypse Inside by Sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
I was jamming a lot for 93. I think that's an awesome record. Transitional a little bit for them too, but kind of fit and catchy. But I really, honestly, the album I think I probably listened to among the most was Crowbar. It's like, again, it's like, try to put on Tool, but it's like that Crowbar record just hits on all cylinders.
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, Kirk Windstein is, dude, he's like fucking living legend. So underrated. And Crowbar, I didn't get into Crowbar until I got into Down. And then that's when I got into Crowbar, because Down, and then it was just like, holy shit, this stuff rules. Heavy as hell. No, I agree. That album's great. I mean, I get it. People, if you don't like Tool, you don't like Tool. If you can't get into it, if it doesn't click, maybe one day it will. Who knows? I don't
hate it as much as I thought I would hate it.
I can guarantee you the anal cunt will never click with me.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
That's like it shouldn't.
And if we're sitting here talking about Crowbar and shit that kind of New Orleans, you got to talk about Take As Needed for Pain.
I was waiting for it, and I'm here to say, honestly, this is not even remotely. That's my favorite album of the '90s. I think, period.
Dude, it's that and Dope Sick to me are like that bang.
I listen to Take As Needed for Pain. I can put it on any given time, any day of the week, and I'll listen to it all the way through. And it hits me the same way that it hit me the first time I heard it. It's you need a shower afterwards.
Oh, dude,
you feel like you're gonna fail a drug test when it's over.
I've never done heroin, and after I listen to that album, I know what it feels like to do heroin.
Right, you're pissing dirty.
Seriously,
like it's over for you.
Like I'm like running around the house, like trying to chase the dragon, and my family's like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
You're not
I'm like fucking. I got like the scratching. And I'm like,
it's a totally filled. It's so perfect.
I sleep out back in a box. It's like, what the fuck?
It's an amazingly atmospheric record in a different way than a Catatonia record, or
Dude, it's so vile. It's like there in a lot of ways.
We talked about Doom Death before with all these British bands doing the romantic European thing with this is so Southern drug addict like. Yeah. It's so different than there's no atmosphere to this other than one that's just being in a bathroom and vomiting.
Literally, you're in a fucking bathtub with a needle sticking out of your arm, covered in your own puke.
Right. Which is funny because, I mean, the way that Take Is Needed for Pain creates the atmosphere. I listened to Live in Leipzig. That's a 93 record from Mayhem. And that creates the same atmosphere. Almost invented that atmosphere that black metal kind of loved too, because they recorded in like 90. And it's like everybody's tried to capture that. For black metal, everybody tried to capture the I Hate God atmosphere. And I don't think anybody really ever. I don't think they have after it really. And a lot of bands never have.
That and Dope Sick. Like I said, those are the pinnacle of I Hate God for me. Even though I do like everything else that they've done.
Like it's
Confederacy is still great, and In the Name of Suffering is great, but Take As Needed is like, if I were to make a list of 10 quintessential 90s albums,
probably one of my, I'm not saying
it would be on.
It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite albums of the 90s, period. I love that album so much. I think it's a perfect genre. It's number one. If you want to look at what makes a great album, it's genre defining. It's a great album all the way through to listen to. There's no filler on it. It's their defining moment. And it influenced so many other bands to do this. It nails on all cylinders. And it's one of my desert island records.
And I typically, I told you before, I typically don't like the stoner stuff, even though with that type of vocals, you know,
Mm.
it Mike just does not bother me at all.
One of my biggest influences
Fits.
on vocals ever.
Yeah, I can see that.
He's a total. He goes all in. You know, I think Maddie did that with Dismember. If you really listen to like all these death metal records, to me, I think Maddie still stands out in Dismember, being really harsh, not like.
Again, we're gonna start talking about vocals compared to shit today, and it's like I just
a sludge band now that's trying to mimic I Hate God. Again, you're right. The vocals would sound watered down.
The thing is with I Hate God, with Mike, with all of these old school bands that we're talking about, there's like dynamics. Mike literally sounds like he's being fucking stabbed by a homeless guy in his ass.
Probably was.
Okay, probably. But it's like it's like listening to Kirk from Crowbar. There's something
really unique vocals.
Yes.
Too. Yeah.
There's something to it. Like there's a dynamic to it that it's like memorable. You can put on a Crowbar album,
right,
and you know exactly. If you listen to shit now that tries to take from I Hate God or Crowbar, it just sounds generic.
You're not put on Crowbar.
Forced.
You're not put on that self-titled Crowbar when you're having a bad week.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bad listen, dude. You're gonna fucking blow your brains out. Like that's really people talk about like I Hate God having that atmosphere. Like Crowbar is like it makes you want to just like. That's
Doom
like your girlfriend just left you. You're drunk.
Like
you're fat. Like it's fucking.
Yeah, it's doomy without being like.
It's gloomy.
Yeah, it's not. That's a perfect because it's New Orleans. It's not really. It's like straight gloom.
It's a party city
sludge.
too. You think all these guys, and it's the most fucking drug up, miserable dudes that ever.
Yeah, dude.
Which is funny, like Kirk had a very well documented coke problem. It's like number one, how do you have a coke problem and a weight problem and write riffs like that? That's a.
Have you seen him now? He's skinny as
looks
fuck,
great,
dude.
He looks great. But it's how he made that music with. Both of those records, like the Crowbar record and Take His Need for Pain, it's like they're totally their own vibe, which is way different from what the death metal stuff was doing, way different than like the doom bands in Europe were doing, which I think was far more again romantic, far more melodic.
There was something like gothic, but not gothic in the way of Typo Negative, but there was something.
Anathema's kind of gothic.
Anathema and My Dying Bride and shit like that. It's gothic, but in like a 100% like classical European way. And I think it worked, you know. I think that maybe Paradise Lost was like always teetering, but when they did Icon and Draconian Times, I think it kind of went in more of a, I don't even know what, more of an organic kind of.
I think a lot of those bands
direction,
a lot of those bands like The Cure a lot too, and Fields of Niflheim and stuff like that. Like
you can't tell me that like Catatonia, those dudes didn't listen to shoegaze albums.
Oh yeah, and totally we're into The Cure and Fields and bands like that and Sisters of Mercy. I don't think there's a whole lot of Sisters of Mercy going on in the I Hate God camp. I think it was mostly Smack, Black Flag, My War, and like you know probably Saint Vitus and more drugs. I think there was not a whole lot going on besides. We're a lot of Fields of Niflheim records getting spun around New Orleans, but
there's a lot of shit that it was crazy going back and putting all these albums on my playlist, the ones that I have on there, and a lot of the stuff that a lot I got into later, some of the power metal stuff like Angra, Angels Cry, Conception, Parallel Minds, which is a great album. That was later, and there's like eras, I can go back from when I was that year to a couple years later to a couple years later. And going back, I can mention the Butthole Surfers, Independent Worm Saloon. That was
love the Butthole Surfers.
Fucking great album at that time. Nude Swirl, which is a band that one album to me absolutely fucking perfect. It fits perfectly with the Seattle stuff, if you want to call that, grunge, if you want to use that corporate term, but it fits perfectly with Nirvana.
90s rock.
I'm going to mention, because I fucking have to, with almost every podcast we do on these years, I have to mention Monster Magnet.
That's right.
1993 Super Judge.
Super Judge, yeah.
You know, again, the
Every
couple
single
years
year we
after,
pick, there's a Monster Mag record. Was there a year that they didn't put a record out? That's okay.
Well, yeah, because I think we did 93, which is this.
95.
95 was Dopes, and 99 was I think Power Trip. No, it was on 98.
That was 98. It's Power Trip.
But another big one when I was back then, Fishbone.
Fishbone.
Give
okay.
a Monkey a Brain. Absolutely love that album. Swerve Driver, Mezcal Head, which is anybody that really gets into it's shoegaze, but it's more guitar driven. Not as, I want to say, depressing as like Slow Dive or.
Did you get into Scorn at all? Because I mean, Scorn has.
I have. What is it? Ve Solace? Is that the one?
They have a record here in '93 that's also really great. Scorn is like, we didn't mention them with like the picture.
Which album was '93?
It's Colossus is the record they put out in '93. Yeah.
I just had the one, just the whatever's on the fucking cover. It's like white.
Oh, yeah, the white. Yeah.
Ve Solace. Whatever.
Yeah.
Looks like a pussy, but I know it's not.
It's probably the pussy that Mike Williams fucked in '93. But I think that Scorn record is really cool. I think they were also one of those bands. I think it's cool. Like there's the industrial thing is, I think.
Dude, you have the same Brutality song.
Oh yeah.
That I put Septicemic Plague.
Awesome.
That's the same fucking
Scott, man. Shouts to Scott. Awesome. One of the best vocals in death metal ever. Really is. Also had Tomas too. Got to shout him out eventually. Dysphere, Brutal Side of War. Tomas isn't on that Dysphere record, but it's for their first record. The band started in '93. Puts out a record too. So it's like it's just a great year for whether it's punk or death metal or grind or gore grind or anything or rock even.
Or Judgment Night soundtrack.
Judgment Night soundtrack is fantastic.
I don't give a
Biohazard.
fuck when anybody says.
First of all, the movie's great.
The movie fucking rules.
The movie's Emilio. Fucking
Dennis Leary, come on.
We watched that movie and then we jammed the soundtrack at Lonnie's house.
Yeah.
The last time was amazing.
Yeah.
Biohazard, which I think we're gonna do. I think we should just do '94 next.
Oh.
Go in order for once. We'll do '94.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, State of the World Address.
State of the World Address.
I'll get twisties and I'll wear overalls for it. Last
Speaking of
Biohazard record before
they're back, dude.
They are back. I'm excited.
So am I. I want them to come around.
Evan Seinfeld is probably the cringiest person I've ever
seen
in my life.
Back in the day, I thought that dude was just fucking awesome. And now,
I'm sure I'd have a great time hanging out with him.
Yeah, I'm sure
he's awesome. I'm sure you'd end up banging him.
He looks great, he's thin, he's cut. It's like, he's not.
He fucked Tara Patrick. He's not gonna. I'm not gonna talk shit on my podcast. God bless you, Evan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you ever see this.
But yeah, they're back, man. So it's like I'm stoked for that. But yeah, no, dude, the Judgment Night soundtrack is absolutely De La Soul.
Oh yeah,
that
awesome.
fucking
really cool. Their origins of what would eventually become the rap rock thing, and it's funny, people call Chaos AD really the first roots of nu metal.
No.
And we forgot to mention another one of my favorite records where it gets to the more alternative metal kind of thing is Fudge Tunnel, Creep Diets. 93.
Was it '93?
One of my favorite records, which I think also was a big. I think a lot of people really wrote. A lot of extreme metal fans, I think, wrote off Fudge Tunnel as like earache's bid for a grab at like an alternative band, but Fudge Tunnel has a lot more going on than all those other bands. Really heavy, cool sounds. And they would eventually do Nail Bomb in a year from now if we do '94. So
I can't believe Creep Diets came out. I completely overlooked that. I love that album.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and I love Nail Bomb.
And Intercrucis, as far as
Dude, I just listened to Screams and Whispers today, and I was thinking about how...
I didn't really know where to fit them in, so I'm fitting them in at the end.
Dude, people call them thrash, and it's like... that album is so weird.
It's just it's just a metal record to me.
Yeah, it has this like kind of creepy feel to it.
Yeah,
to the song,
it's unique.
You know?
It's cool. It's hard to like. The vocals are awesome.
Yeah.
Too. It's like really really cool. It's hard to pinpoint. That's why I didn't really know where to fit them in. So I'm kind of just mentioning them now. Kind of with Fudge Tunnel because I didn't really know where to put Fudge Tunnel in. Like they're not an alternative rock band. They're really not a metal band. They're heavy, but they're just a heavy unique band.
I always, when I listen to Fudge Tunnel, even though I know that it's not like these other bands, but when I do listen to I Hate God and Crowbar, I'll throw Fudge Tunnel on, and I think it fits perfectly.
Yeah, it fits better with that than like with Broken Hope.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. And we got to mention one album, Blue Murder.
St. Carmine.
Well, this one is...
Yeah, Carmine's not on this, actually.
No. Yeah, when you read his book, it's kind of weird. Nothing But Trouble. It's not as good as the self-titled. It's nowhere near as good as the self-titled. I don't like the fact that they do Itchy Coo Park.
I've admittedly after the self-titled one, I really don't have any interest in this. Yeah.
It's okay. It's John Sykes, so I have to mention it, and I like it because it's John Sykes, but it's nothing like the self-titled. That original album with that lineup, just those three guys, I think blows this away. We're gonna mention Vince Neil.
Love it.
Exposed.
Awesome.
I remember the first time I played that for so many people. That's the first show I saw.
Getting Hard is a great. Oh yeah.
That's the first show I saw at Blossom. He opened for Van Halen in '93, and
he sounds amazing on that record.
And he sounded great.
Everybody
live.
that says that Vince Neil can't sing, and he's a totally created studio singer. I'm like, listen to Exposed. He was. I'm making no excuses for him now because he's a living meme at this point.
Yeah.
And he needs to just be in his house and count his money and hang out with his, I'm sure, beautiful wife and, sad for all the things that have happened to him in his life, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like he really plays somebody Exposed. Be like Vince can cut it.
I played. I think on Dr. Feelgood. It sounds to me, he just sounds like Vince Neil. On Exposed, he sounds like he's fucking trying to make a point because he was fired.
Doesn't have that overproduced sound
quit.
too. Doesn't have that overproduced sound too. Like
no, it's fucking Steve Stevens on guitar. It's just so he shreds the song "The Edge."
Oh yeah.
They cover the Sweet
Fine Wine.
Oh my god. They cover Sweet's "Set Me Free," and the fucking solo break in that is one of the most insane.
It's a
fucking
great
thing.
hard rock record, man. I love Exposed. I listen to Exposed quite often.
Look in Her Eyes. He started when they came out. When they opened for Van Halen, my dad took me, which oddly enough, I'm going with my dad tomorrow night to see Alice Cooper.
Oh yeah,
and but yeah, that was the first show he took me to, and it was just awesome. And they came out with Look in Her Eyes, that song, and it just fucking. I can't remember if he played any Cruise songs. I'm sure he did.
Did he? I was going to ask you that. Is he?
I can't remember. I'll have to
or?
go back and look at the set list.
I thought Nicky had all the rights to.
I can't remember, but I do remember the songs that they did play, and they did play "You're Invited, But Your Friend Can't Come," "The Edge," because I remember Steve Stevens. They brought out his guitar and he played the flamenco parts, and then dude, it was fucking awesome. And Vince, although he's a fucking clown now because of how he sounds. Then he was just great, and as big of a Van Halen or Van Hagar at that time, as big as a fan as I was, that to me, I went out right after that and I bought Exposed. The next album he put out, Carved in Stone, complete garbage.
Yeah,
it's just absolutely just fucking derivative. It's so dated. It's like 90s. It's got samples on it. There's like one song. He was
trying.
I think the one song.
Even Generation Swine, the Crew record, when he came back,
dude.
I can't stand. I hate that record. I disavow it. I think it's terrible.
shittiest fucking pile of garbage.
It's awful. And then you get Methods of Mayhem, and I just want to fucking blow my genitals off. And
I already tell the same story. I was driving to go get my cousin. He lived in Florida, and I was driving down to Florida to pick him up, and I was in the Atlanta area, and I remember the radio station there was like, yeah, new Tommy Lee track, blah blah blah, and so it starts playing, and it was Get Naked.
Oh yeah, I saw it live.
And I'm just sitting there driving, and I'm just like, dude, this fucking. When are they gonna play the fucking Tommy Lee track?
Okay, I'm not gonna lie to you. Full disclosure. I mean, Lil' Kim. I mean, I beat off to the music video as a kid. I mean, like, I was like, I was beating off to Lil' Kim. This time in like the late '90s, I was beating off to Lil' Kim all the time anyway. So that's. But I digress. It's still a terrible song.
So fucking bad, dude. But yeah, man, the second Vince Neil album is complete shit, absolute garbage. I wouldn't even.
Yeah.
Exposed. Here's the thing. My favorite Crew album is without Vince, and that's the self-titled.
The Krabby, yeah, I know that.
Okay, that's my favorite. My favorite Vince album is not a Crew album.
Oh,
it's Exposed.
My favorite Vince Motley Crue album is Theater of Pain.
Now, my favorite Vince Motley Crue album is Theater of Pain.
Yeah.
But Exposed, yeah, I think it's the best thing he's ever done.
He sounds amazing on it.
Oh, dude, he's got something to prove.
It's better than Spaghetti Incident. I mean, it's not saying much, but it is. Like,
there's some tracks on there. Just the covers. I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. I think they do Buick McCain on that album. But that Guns N' Roses.
It's a fall from grace by that point. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just fucking done and over with at that point. I think that the albums that band, the members of that band released, blew away anything that Guns N' Roses did post Use Your Illusion, which, is this and Chinese Democracy, which is the biggest fucking AIDS-infested piece of shit ever. But I mean, Izzy Stradlin, the Juju Hounds,
Snake Pit.
Slash's Snake Pit, Duff, Believe in Me, even Gilby Clarke, Pawn Shop Guitars. Those are all those albums are fucking solid rock albums, and they blow Spaghetti Incident out of the water. Yeah. And there was a lot of hard rock at that time that more of what I was listening to. Steve Vai, Sex and Religion with Devin Townsend on vocals, which was weird to see them at the time on Jay Leno on The Tonight Show.
Yeah.
And Devin Townsend was just a fucking weirdo. And the song was so... Yeah, still is. But I always try to tell my kids, they're 10 and 12, about to be 11 and 13, but, they're getting into music, and they always ask me about stuff. The youngest, Henry, he's into the hard rock stuff. You know? He's into the hard rock, heavy metal. He loves Sabbath, stuff like that. Loves Ozzy. Wyatt is more into like Herbie Hancock, Curtis Mayfield, which is fucking crazy.
Does he
I think it's awesome.
Sell or snort coke? That's kind of what it's...
So pimp,
Yeah, is he? I mean, he has to be.
But they always ask me about this shit, and I showed them that video of that Steve Vai song that they played on The Tonight Show. And I'm like, imagine, could you even think that this shit would be played on TV today? And they're just like, no. And I played them, Katie and I played them in utero. Mm. We were like, this was on the radio back then. And they're just like, really? And I was like, can you imagine that? I mean, it's just like, it's...
We used to, as far as like memories go with that, like I remember I remember staying up vividly. I remember staying up at this point. I was 8 years old, my sister, and she stayed up and taped Live and Loud, the In Utero concert on MTV. And I remember being in my living room at my mom's apartment up late with my sister watching it and seeing Kurt come out. Seeing Pat Smear come out with a cigarette, and he throws a cigarette, and Kurt comes out with a cigarette, and just looks, it's like a really rock kind of thing, and there's like the angel statues, and like, my sister taped that, like, it was like moment. It's like somebody. So it sounds corny, but it's like people watching the Beatles.
Yeah.
On TV, or like I remember seeing the Beatles on TV. Like Lemmy's always like I remember watching the Beatles on TV, and like it's life changing. Like it's ingrained.
That's
in your
why
memory.
I will always stand up for stuff like Nirvana. I will always stand up for them when it comes to that argument of did Nirvana kill heavy metal? Did it? And I'm like,
They got
no.
a lot of kids into rock music, man. I
It
love Kiss now, but before I even got into Kiss, which was the first band I ever got into when I was 11, 12 years old. But as a little kid, I remember watching Kurt Cobain before I ever saw Kiss. Like, I remember him walking out on that stage, like, that was one, and my sister being older than me, and she was really into it. And I remember being like, well, this is cool. Like, Dom, my son is 8 years old, his sister's 15, and when you're that age, 7, 8 years old, it's like you look up to your older siblings. You know, you want to be into what they're into, or at least you're watching them be into stuff. And when she was a teenager, like, taping that with her friends, I was like, this has got to be the coolest thing in the world, you know?
Yeah, dude, totally. And that's, to me, I remember buying Nevermind, Pearl Jam 10, Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger, Alice in Chains, Facelift. That changed a lot for me. And to think back that shit was on the radio at the time, and that stuff was selling millions, and that was what was popular, you know, it's crazy to think about it, you know. And
I'm surprised with In Utero, too, because it is like, teens, you know, I mean, you know, Nevermind, and especially the song Teen Spirit. Like, I love Butch Vig. I think he's an awesome producer, but they really, Nirvana really captured what I think they wanted to do with that record, with the pop mixed with the punk. People always talk about pop punk, which I hate that term. To me, a pop punk record is Nevermind. It's the ultimate blend of punk and pop.
yeah,
And I think on In Utero, they were just trying to not do that kind of record, and it still was so massive.
yeah,
Because, I mean, Rape Me and Penny Royalty are pop songs. Still,
yeah.
you can't, like, take the pop out of their music.
No.
You can't take the lullaby, Beatles element out.
That's what made them.
It's like Alice in Chains not being melodic or not having harmonies. It's like, you can't be not catchy when you have harmonies like that in singers. Like, they could sing the dictionary and it's going to sound good.
Yeah. No, I agree, dude. I mean, that stuff to me was like the world back then. And I remember telling you that I did say that In Utero I wasn't into as much. I listened to it a couple weeks ago on my way home after we did the last podcast, and I was listening to it on my way home, and I was kind of like, okay, I kind of get it more, you know. I still don't like it as much as Nevermind, but I fucking totally respect it, because to think that was number one.
Yeah.
And then you could see the shit that's number one today, and it's like, that's what's wrong with fucking people today. Because back then there was music was so different, you know, than it is now. Whether we're talking about mainstream or underground, and looking through, I'm glad we're not doing lists with these years.
Oh, yeah, it's too hard. And they also brought out Jawbreaker on that tour, which is another band from around this time. And it's like, that's, you know, opened up another younger generation to like.
Yeah, and I think they played the Jar Arena in Akron. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm getting the shows mixed up. It may have been Rage Against the Machine that came around and they brought the Jesus Lizard with them, but it may have been Nirvana.
Yeah, Jesus Lizard and Sonic Youth, they also brought out a leg on In Utero tour too. I mean, it's a, you know, I think it's a great year. I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
This is a tough year because there's a lot of stuff to cover. I think we did from Anal Cunt to I God to Dark Throne to we covered a lot of different stuff.
I'm sorry you didn't mention Bastards by Motorhead.
And you know, what a fitting end is. Like, Motorhead did put out a record in '93. It's a great Motorhead record. All Motorhead records are great. Love Bastards. What else are you gonna say?
Yeah.
You gotta save it for last, right? Motorhead put out a record in '93. Guess what? They probably have a record in most of these years we're gonna do, and they sound like Motorhead records, and they're great. And I'm gonna say the same thing every single time. Like, yep, Motorhead had a record this year.
Yeah. What's it sound like? It
sounds like Motorhead.
Yeah.
It's
But yeah, no. I mean, before we go, real quick, I do want to mention. I'm gonna give a shout out to my buddy Jason Larson in L.A. He went to the Dark Angel show. Sorry, Death Angel. I always get the two mixed up. Jim Durkin passed away recently. I think he already had tickets to the show. It was Evil Dead and Dark Angel. And I think they were already going to play. They were play Darkness Descends or something. In its
Yeah, they
entirety.
did it all the way through. Yeah.
And then that he already had tickets to it, and then fucking Dirk.
They're doing the violence thing where they're trying to do everything. Are they also not going to invite Rob Flynn? Because violence did the Eternal Nightmare all the way through for their. And Rob Flynn was, ceremoniously not invited.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Should have had his poetry slam open up the.
Well, Jim Durkin was invited,
right? As he should
be. But yeah, it's Jay picked up the shirt for me. It was great. Like I said, Evil Dead opens. They got one of my favorite thrash metal albums, Annihilation of Civilization. I fucking worship that album.
Underrated.
But yeah, thanks to him, and it sucks. I know Dark Angel gets back together and going to be putting some new material out. Gene Hogman's back with
Hopefully they don't do the Spotted by Blood treatment and they wreck the fucking sound of it and make it all modern sound.
Are they redoing?
I hope they don't do the Bonded by Blood treatment and redo their old stuff. I think thrash bands need to stop doing that. I think it should be again.
What do you think of Sepultura though doing?
I don't like it. I don't like it.
It's not. I'm sorry, not Sepultura. It's Cavalera.
I don't mind doing it live. I think that's cool. But doing the recording of it, I don't.
I tell you why I like those albums. But I tell you why I don't mind that is because the production's shitty anyway.
Yeah.
And it's raw, and I'm interested in hearing what they do.
I'd rather have Max and Igor do a new band, have it be influenced by that kind of stuff, and just call it something else.
Mm-hmm.
I would love that. I think they have the chops to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I would even love if Max wanted to do something like Chaos AD again. Even I'd be down with that too.
Yeah.
I think he's into the underground enough and likes enough cool stuff. He could make that happen. You don't need to redo your old record. He doesn't need to be doing that.
I just wonder why they're doing. Maybe they're doing it to have fun. I don't know.
Sure.
I hope Dark Angel puts an album out. I would imagine they're going to continue. I think that they are.
I hope so, yeah.
It sucks that he just fucking up and died.
Yeah.
But yeah, so on that note, Motorhead sounds like Motorhead.
Yeah, and the top album of 1993 is Everyone Should Be Killed by Animal.
Oh, Jesus.
So that's
wow. We'll close it. We'll end it with that. So, all right. Thanks, guys.
Peace. Cheers.